The withdrawal state is so terrible and so terrifying. And I think the number one question people have is, will I ever feel normal again?
So, definitely part of the problem right now, where the field is now, that the descriptions that you can find in most guidelines, in most doctors' offices, and patient leaflets and stuff, is generally very underestimated compared to how horrible it can actually feel. Like, I have no shortage of people saying this was the absolute worst thing they went through, was coming off the psychiatric drugs. So it's definitely up there in terms of the possible intensity. And obviously, for many people, some of the symptoms can mimic, like kind of be familiar symptoms, but many of the symptoms are completely new. So it's obvious that your mind starts interpreting that and like analyzing it and figuring out what it is. It's very tough. Even just consider how difficult it is to have a bad day without also thinking about what it is and how to fix it. Now, that mechanism applied to this degree of symptoms, obviously at some point you do reach in your mind the possible conclusion that maybe I'm permanently damaged, or I'm crazy or insane, and something like that. These are perfectly understandable interpretations of it, but still wrong, obviously. Like, you're not going crazy, you're not dying, you're not permanently damaged. But the time frame is just, we have to extend that for long. That makes sense. Like, so it's still a good story. I think there are, we just need to extend the time frame of our mental categories of what withdrawal symptoms are. It doesn't necessarily just last a couple of days or weeks, depending on how you taper the drug, obviously. So if you sit with a very severe, for whatever reason brought you to taper in a way that caused very severe symptoms, the main message is that it is a healing. It just takes longer than the time has gone already. And the most important thing I would say to look for is if there's been some healing, like, not that you haven't necessarily healed fully yet, but if you can say that there definitely has been healing compared to when I stopped. So the main thing to look for is if it's, despite everything, still better than it used to be. So that could be some symptoms, if you can point to some symptoms that were there months or years ago but now have gone, or the intensity is reduced. That's a sign of healing. And there may be some ways down the road to fully healing, but the important thing is figuring out whether healing did in fact occur, but it just takes longer than what we'd want it to.
Will I feel normal again?
And you'll feel normal again. I assure you, you'll feel normal again in time, but it won't necessarily feel like that during, and that's the tricky part, right? So we can have a knowledge, a rational cognitive knowledge that we'll feel normal again, but without that necessarily having the huge emotional impact right now, if that makes sense. So it's like knowing without necessarily feeling it. So on the worst withdrawal days, it makes sense to not necessarily emotionally connect to the idea that you'll feel normal again. So then the trick is kind of to run it on the knowledge, right? And that is, psychologically speaking, more difficult. But I assure you, and that's what most of this work that people like me helping people through psychiatric drug withdrawal is about. Obviously the technical tapering stuff, but also the spreading the knowledge that you will of course feel normal again.
And then the big ending question, do you have patients who today are off the drug, are thriving, feel normal, and are fully healed?
Yes, most of them will. If we do it correctly and with the right support, yes.